And a lot of people across the country are ticked off. We've got a Republican president, Republican heads of every agency, Republican majorities in both houses of Congress, and right now we're not delivering. We're not getting the job done, and people are frustrated. I'm frustrated. I promise you, as frustrated as you are, I'm banging my head into it every day. And I think we've got an incredible opportunity, an opportunity that doesn't happen very often. Unified control of government for Republicans historically has been quite rare. And it has been the Senate that hasn't been able to deliver. You look at the battles over Obamacare, those were maddening. And we were not able, we've got an excruciatingly narrow majority, 52 Republicans. That means if any 3 Republicans jump ship, we're toast. Wrangling together 50 out of 52 Republicans with this very diverse, fractious conference is not easy. All of that being said, I believe we will get tax reform done. I think
this year?
I think it'll either be late this year or early next year. I think we're early in the debate. It's going to take at least a couple of months just to wrangle out. There are a lot of back and forths that are going to happen in tax reform. But I do think virtually every Republican wants to get to yes. And I think that's a really important precondition to getting it done.
Yes on what? Meaning what do you think it ultimately looks like? Are we talking about a 20% corporate tax rate? Is that the number that you think could actually get passed? Most of the conversation, at least that I've heard, at least behind the scenes, has been at 23, maybe 24, 20, something like that. And then how do you deal with the individual rates?
Look, I hope we see a big tax cut. I hope we lower the corporate rate. I'd like to see the corporate rate, yes, at 20. I'd like to see it at 15. I'd like to see real tax cuts for working men and women. I think we need to be, the test for delivering is, are we delivering to the plumber in Michigan? Are we delivering to the single mom waiting tables in Texas? And if we are, that's a good tax cut. Now, the things that matter on that are A, individual rates that people are paying. But B, I think front and center, the biggest concern should be jobs and economic growth, that we need pro-growth tax cuts. We need tax cuts. And by the way, the word cut is important. I think this should be an unapologetic tax cut, not just tax reform, but a real tax cut to generate booming economic growth. So that's a big argument we're having internally within the conference, is whether this should be a tax cut or not. And, there are a handful of moderates in the Senate Republican Conference that style themselves deficit hawks. And I actually disagree with them. We've had some real knockdown, drag-out battles over lunch where I'm taking the other side. Nobody cares more about the deficit and debt than I do. It was one of the big reasons I ran for Senate, because we got $20 trillion in debt and we're bankrupting our kids. But here's the honest truth. This Congress is never going to cut enough to turn around the debt. We're simply not going to do it. You look at the agony the Senate had over very modest reforms in Medicaid, one of the 3 big entitlement programs. The only way to pay down the debt is economic growth. And economic growth is the 800-pound gorilla. The problem we have is that we've been trapped for 8 years in anemic growth. From 2008 to today, growth averaged 1.2% a year. As you know, the historic average going back to World War II is 3.3%. If we're at 1% and 2% growth, you can't tackle the debt. If we're back at historic levels, 3, 4, 5% growth, suddenly the debt, think about the last time we had a surplus. It was in the 90s, coming out of 12 years of Reagan-Bush, out of major tax cuts, and the booming economic growth gave us a surplus paying down the debt. If we want to do it again, if you want to see Reagan-style economic growth, you've got to have Reagan-style tax cuts. And the so-called deficit hawks saying, well, let's not cut taxes because I care about the debt, they're working against what they say they're advanced. Prior to Obama, the last 4-year period where economic growth was averaged less than 1% a year was 1978 to 1982. So it was coming out of Jimmy Carter. It was the same economic policies. Cause and effect.
We've seen the GDP comparisons overlaid, the Obama GDP for 8 years versus the Reagan GDP. It doesn't matter. They'll say that the deficit blew out. They don't take into account winning. They don't take into
account where the solution matters, because what happened in 81, Reagan came in. We saw a major tax cut. We saw, again, major tax reform in 86, and the economy exploded. Andrew, you know what GDP growth was in 1984?
And the deficit blew out, though.
Well, hold on a second. Let's focus on GDP for a second. I'll address the deficit.
Okay.
Any idea what GDP growth was in '84?
Give me the number.
7.2%.
What did it average for those 8 years?
I mean, those are crazy.
Over 4.
7.2. Those are China numbers. Those are India numbers. You look at even the most bullish voices in Washington, they say, we'll get 3% growth. My view is, why aim small if we actually have a real tax cut? And in terms of the deficit, by the way, federal revenues skyrocketed. You want to know why the deficit grew?
Because we grew our defense budget in a huge, meaningful way.
And because Tip O'Neill was Speaker, and the Democrats, as revenues grew, they spent even more. Yes, it is true that if Congress spends even more than the new tax money you raise, the deficit will go up. But if you look at revenues, Reagan cut taxes, and revenues, what the federal government got went up. And not only that, the wealthy ended up paying a higher percentage of taxes. The working men and women did much better because we cut taxes and had economic growth.
Let's talk about taxes today, though. You have a smaller base of people who are paying taxes. This
Yeah.
is not the situation that you were dealing with back in 1986. If you're going to hand tax cuts out, the bulk of those benefits will go to the wealthiest people because they're paying the bulk of the taxes. And that's a pretty tough message to try and get out.
See, I actually think it's a very easy message if we focus on growth. That growth should be the central concern. Why is it? Because growth impacts most the people at the bottom of the economic ladder. People like in 1957, when my dad was washing dishes at 50 cents an hour. If you're a young person and you got your first job out of school, what you want to see is booming economic growth, so you suddenly have 2, 3, 4 other job offers. You have competing employers driving up your wages.
But it's a tougher message to say that you're not going to necessarily see this in your next paycheck. You're not necessarily going to see this at the end of the year in your federal taxes. It's not going to make as big of a difference.
Well, that's why we need to focus on a real tax cut, and a tax cut that impacts working men and women, that impacts, a family trying to say, do I have enough money for braces for my kids? That's what our focus needs to be. And if we do that, I mean, the beauty of growth is it expands opportunities for everyone, but especially those. Look, if you're already rich, economic growth doesn't make a huge difference. You're going to be rich with or without it. The people, it makes a difference.
The Fed stays at zero and your assets get marked up.
You get free money.
Right.
Stagnant growth. The Obama economic growth of the last 8 years essentially calcifies our socioeconomic strata. So the rich do great.
Well, it made it worse.
But working men and women, by the way, the people that fueled Trump's election in 2016, they get left out in the cold. You know what? The billionaires, they don't pay the estate tax. The really rich, they don't pay the death tax. They hire lawyers and accountants. They do generation-skipping trusts. You think the George Soroses of the world are paying the death tax? No. The people who pay the death tax, who I talk to all the time, are farmers out in West Texas who are growing cotton, who are struggling hard, and when they pass on, the next generation has to sell the farm in order to pay the federal government. The people that pay the estate tax are small business owners that have a small factory that when the patriarch passes on, the next generation sells the factory and fires the workers. That's what the death tax is all about. The super rich don't pay it anyway, and that's the one thing Bernie Sanders said in the last campaign that was right. He said the system is rigged. He's right. Washington is rigged for the super wealthy. If we want to answer the mandate of this last election, we need growth for the working men and women. The next several months are going to be hammering out the details of the tax cut, but that's going to be front and center for me. Are we improving the lives? Are we improving the take-home pay? Are we improving the prospects of working men and women? You asked about deducting state and local taxes. I think we should end that deduction, in significant part because that federal deduction encourages high-tax states to jack up the taxes even more. And so it's the federal government encouraging Democrats to raise taxes, which hurt the people in blue states. But here's the important question, and it goes to what you said. We can end that deduction if we're lowering the tax rate enough that people, even in those blue states, are seeing a net tax reduction. If we're not lowering the rates enough, if we come out of this and a working family in Orange County is seeing their taxes go up because Republicans got elected, we did something really wrong. And it's why what we're debating right now is the antecedent question to tax reform, which is we're passing through the budget resolution and the level of the tax cut matters. Now, the Senate Budget Committee has said it at $1.5 trillion on a static basis, which means ignoring economic growth, ignoring incentives, I think that's a mistake. I think we should be going much bigger and much bolder, because on a dynamic basis, you're looking at essentially little to no net tax cut. And if you're being deficit neutral, what you're doing is everything you empty out of one bucket, you're pouring into another. The reason that matters is we're not going to have the votes to eliminate the state and local tax deduction unless we're cutting the rate enough to lower the net tax payment, even in blue states. We need to be lowering taxes for everyone. Right. And that's also
But then it makes it even harder to make the numbers work, right? I mean, that's the other
back
conundrum.
to dynamic scoring, saying that's the way.
And let's focus on business for a second. So there's a debate within Congress. Do you have immediate expensing for capital expenses, or do you lower the corporate rate? My answer is both. If you look at the analysis, you look at the scoring, immediate expensing is incredibly pro-growth. If a farmer buys a tractor, he can immediately expense it. If a steel factory buys new equipment, the factory can immediately expense it. That produces jobs. It raises wages. It helps working men and women. Now, folks on the other side say, well, gosh, we'd rather lower the corporate rate. If we're doing a small tax cut, you have to choose between one or the other. If we're doing an unapologetic Reagan-style, we are cutting taxes because we want to see the economy growing 3, 4, 5%, we can do both, and that's profoundly progressive.
Let me ask you, though. You mentioned that there's so much division even within the Republican caucus on this. If you get to a tax cut that winds up raising some taxes on some of those working families because it's not going low enough to lower their bills, would you vote for that?
Look, if we don't lower people's taxes, we will have failed at our task. Getting to 50 is not going to be easy. Nobody is going to get everything they want. There are going to be compromises. There are going to be trade-offs back and forth. I believe we can do it. What I can tell you is I am spending literally every waking moment trying to bring Republicans together, trying to develop consensus and bring together people all across, to use the phrase, to unite the clans and to say, look, let's just deliver on what we promised. We can do it. And if we got an election coming up next year. Whether 2018 is a great year for Republicans or a terrible year for Republicans, I think is in our hands and our control. If we deliver, if we get a big tax cut, if we repeal Obamacare and the economy is booming, we could pick up 4, 5, 6 Senate seats. If we do nothing, we could get obliterated. If you look at the substantive policy from this president, this administration, by and large, the substantive policy has been excellent. Gorsuch was a home run. And actually, judicial appointments across the federal bench at the district court and courts of appeals are strong, principled constitutionalists. It's one of the brightest points.
These guys can't stand success. What do they don't want to win? They want to.
Reg reform. Reg reform is a big deal. If you care about economic growth, my number one priority is economic growth. There are two big levers for government: tax reform and reg reform. Reg reform, they've done terrific. Pulling out of the Paris climate deal. That was a big deal. I spent 45 minutes on Air Force One making the case to the president why we should pull out of the Paris climate deal. He was getting lobbied like crazy by big CEOs on the other side saying, let's stay in it. He was getting lobbied within the administration, a number of folks in his administration. He did the right thing.
And yet, to some degree, we are staying in it.
Well, but I'll tell you.
I would think that you'd be frustrated with that.
We have to follow through. There's no doubt follow through matters. But, he pulled out on a Thursday. The next day, Friday morning, the president called me and said, well, Ted, I did it. What do you think? And I actually responded by invoking my wife, Heidi. And I said, well, Mr. President, let me tell you what Heidi said this morning. She picked up the Wall Street Journal, and she saw right across the front a quote from your speech where you said, I was elected by the people of Pittsburgh and not the people of Paris. And Heidi said, you know what, that's exactly right. And my message to the president that morning, I said, Mr. President, everyone who hates you is ticked off right now, and everyone who loves you is thrilled. If you look at the reg reform agenda, this administration's delivering. If you look at the legislative agenda, for a decade, voices in the media and sometimes in leadership said, oh, it's the crazy conservatives that are the impediment to getting things done. Listen, it's the conservatives who are leading the charge to deliver on this legislative agenda, and the people who are voting no, who are taking it down.
Clay feet.
are the folks who for years told us they know how to govern. Great. If you know how to govern, how about step up and do it, and let's get together and get to 50 and get the job done. I think it's unfortunate that you've got Republicans squabbling. I was at dinner last night, and a woman I was talking to said, all right, is Washington, is it like a high school or a junior high? And my answer, I said, oh, no, I wish we had the maturity of high school. It is a junior high, right down to the cliques. It is like the movie Mean Girls. I wish people would stop bickering and engaging in the personal insults. It's not productive. We've got a job to do. And, what I hear from Texans is enormous frustration that this moment in time with unified government is fleeting. And if we blow this opportunity, it may not come again. And so my standard approach, every day as you walk down the halls in the Capitol, reporters run to you and say, what do you think about the latest tweet? What do you think about the latest insult from one to another, another? I don't care about any of that. I'm not going to comment on it. I'm not going to get into the political circus. I'm going to focus on substance and policy. Let's deliver on tax cuts. Let's deliver on reg reform. Let's get the economy growing. Let's repeal Obamacare. And if we do that, I think good policy is good politics. The politics takes care of itself if we're delivering results. Okay, I think it's unfortunate that you've got Republicans squabbling. I was at dinner last night, and a woman I was talking to said, all right, is Washington, is it like a high school or a junior high? And my answer, I said, oh, no, I wish we had the maturity of high school. It is a junior high, right down to the cliques. It is like the movie Mean Girls. I wish people would stop bickering and engaging in the personal insults. It's not productive. We've got a job to do. And, what I hear from Texans is enormous frustration that this moment in time with unified government is fleeting. And if we blow this opportunity, it may not come again. And so my standard approach, every day as you walk down the halls in the Capitol, reporters run to you and say, what do you think about the latest tweet? What do you think about the latest insult from one to another, another? I don't care about any of that. I'm not going to comment on it. I'm not going to get into the political circus. I'm going to focus on substance and policy. Let's deliver on tax cuts. Let's deliver on reg reform. Let's get the economy growing. Let's repeal Obamacare. And if we do that, I think good policy is good politics. The politics takes care of itself if we're delivering results. Okay, it is the right thing to decertify.
For him to decertify.
For him to decertify. The certification is every couple of months the president has to certify to Congress that Iran is complying with the Obama nuclear.
So you believe he's done the wrong thing?
No, I think he did the right thing. He's decertifying. Now, the next question is, what should we do? I think we should reimpose sanctions. The administration can reimpose sanctions. That would be the right thing to do. Congress can reimpose sanctions.
You're to the right of him, then. He's not going to do that.
Well, and listen, in the presidential campaign, this was an area where we had a significant disagreement. When I was campaigning, I promised that if I'd been elected on day one, I would have ripped to shreds this Iran deal.
I didn't like the Iran deal in the first place, but now that it's been put in place and other nations around the globe have kind of signed off on this, if we decertify, it gives Iran the position of saying, hey, we did what we were supposed to do. We're going to go ahead with what we're doing and go back to rebuilding our nuclear program, and we can't get anybody else to sign off.
But the problem is they're doing that now. The Iran deal.
UN Watchdog says no.
But they can't actually monitor the sites. The Iran deal set military sites off limit for inspections. Well, guess where they're doing the nuclear work on the military sites? It has other sites where Iran self-inspects. They literally send in Iranian inspectors and we take their word for them. It was designed to allow cheating. And Becky, we're reliving history. Look, all of us are dealing with the enormous challenges North Korea presents because you've got Kim Jong-un, an unstable dictator with nuclear weapons. It's worth pausing and saying, how did North Korea get nuclear weapons? And the way they got it was in the 1990s, Bill Clinton led the world in relaxing sanctions against North Korea in exchange for a promise from Kim Jong-il not to build nuclear weapons. What did he do? He took the billions of dollars, built nukes. The very same person that negotiated the failed North Korea deal is who President Obama and Hillary Clinton recruited to come back to government to negotiate the Iranian deal. Literally the only person on earth out of 7 billion people who screwed this up already. They brought her back and said, do it again. And this Iranian deal, if the Ayatollah Khamenei gets nuclear weapons, I think the odds are unacceptably high that he would use them. And so I believe we should reimpose sanctions. We should use every tool, economic, diplomatic, and if necessary, military, to make clear that the Ayatollah will never get nuclear weapons, because if he does, when he chants death to America and death to Israel, I believe him. I don't think that's rhetoric. I think he means it with a religious zealotry that's scary.
Hey there, thanks for checking out CNBC on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all of the day's biggest stories. You can also click on any of the videos around me to watch the latest from CNBC. Thanks for watching.